Hi, everyone. I wanted to start the class with a brief PowerPoint presentation to tell you what the major themes are of the course and to talk about the requirements. So let me get started by sharing my screen. And American Foreign Policy, this is a course that is compressed. Summer classes are. The course is often, the way I teach it is 14 weeks, and we kind of do a historical chronology of the 20th century into the 21st century, hitting on all kind of major events in American foreign policy history. This summer, we're going to select a few and go deep on those few events. So that's how we're going to proceed. Big questions that we want to think about at the start of this class. Where have we been as Americans? What has America's role been in the world? Where are we now? And where are we going? And is that where we hope to go? What do we hope the United States stands for in the world? So start with this cartoon. This is about almost a decade ago now. Hong Kong residents stand up for democracy through peaceful protest and by voting in record numbers. And here's a typical American. This is the cartoonist idea of how Americans respond to things like that, like democracy. You lost me at stand up. I'm really not that interested. I'm not that interested in Hong Kong. I'm not that interested in democracy at home or foreign policy. I think over the past few months, we've seen a clear kind of refutation of this portrayal of Americans in foreign policy, especially among young people. As you know, there have been quite a lot of things happening on college campuses and around the country in opposition to the war in Israel's war in Gaza. And we're going to end the course actually thinking about that and trying to get some perspective on it by listening to two podcasts about the war in Gaza and about the campus protests. So you can think about whether you are engaged in the way that this guy is engaged in foreign policy or whether you are actively engaged in it. Some more cartoons. America plays an outsized role in the world. It has over the past century. Sometimes the 20th century was called the American century. I don't know if the 21st century would be called that, but we still continue to affect other countries in an outsized way. And there's an old saying that when the United States catches a cold, the world gets pneumonia. And it may not be that the United States is the only one that affects the world in these ways. China certainly does. Russia is doing that. But we still have to grapple with our, the size of our country and the effects we have. We have the largest military in the world. We spend more than every other country combined on our military. So that kind of shows how we are, how we affect the rest of the world or indicates it. Here's another cartoon that symbolizes American foreign policy. We have a history of isolationism, but it's very hard to be isolated from the world when you are a, quote, great power. There are all kinds of ways we're involved and ways that we are aware of and not aware of. And over the course of history, as you will read and see, America keeps getting entangled with the world, whether it wants to or not. And it bogs us down. So that's Uncle Sam being tied up by the world. Finally, another kind of important thing to think about is presidents. And presidents come into power and they deal with things that are left over from prior administrations. They can't remake the world when they come in. So this is Obama coming in after George W. Bush, and look at all he inherited it. He probably didn't want to deal with all this, but he had to, and that's just the way that it is. You can't come in and completely, start from scratch. So think about that, how each president's term leads to the next one and constrains that next president. Here's a saying on the syllabus from Samuel Huntington, a political scientist, the late Samuel Huntington from Harvard University, and he says this: critics say that America is a lie because its reality is so far short of its ideals. They are wrong. America is not a lie. It is a disappointment, but it can be a disappointment only because it is a hope. So this is indicating something, a theme of the class, and speaking to American exceptionalism, that America often sees itself as playing a different kind of role in the world than prior hegemons or world powers, that we bring values as well as interests to our foreign policy, and that we give the world hope that there is a better future, a democratic future where democracy is the liberal democracy is the form of government that other nations or other peoples aspire to, self-determination, all these ideals that we learn in school are something that the United States likes to think of ourselves as promoting around the world. And we fall short of it all the time. But according to Huntington, and you can think about whether you agree with it, the United States still represents these values to tens of millions of people around the world. Is America a lie? Is it a disappointment, or is it still a hope? Again, just leave that as an open question to consider. And here's another foreign policy scholar who writes this: Americans have believed their country is an exception, a necessary nation. If history has shown us anything, it's that the world doesn't have any necessary nations. So that's kind of a counter to the American exceptionalism argument that Samuel Huntington puts forth. And it's a view of Stephen Marche's view is that America is like every other great power. We pursue our national interests and we talk about values, but we don't actually live those values. What does it mean to see America as an exception and as a necessary nation? Well, it means that, we think of ourselves differently, that we behave differently. And this is a refutation of that idea. So kind of think of where you put yourself in this framework. And this is just a fun one. This is a humorist from the 1920s, Will Rogers. Things ain't what they used to be and never were. So the United States, maybe we have a myth. We do have myths about our origins and where we've been over the past 2.5, 3 centuries. We should kind of break through those myths and interrogate them to make sure that we understand what really we've done in the world, what role America really has played, how much of it has been a force for good and how much of it has not been a force for good. And a lot of this course is understanding the role of the United States in history. There's President Biden, and here's two concepts that are important. What are America's interests in the world and what are its values? And are these two the same things? So American interests, keeping Americans safe, keeping Americans prosperous, certainly American interests. And think about our priorities. Where would you put your priority? What do you think American priorities are? You can take a look at these. And they ebb and flow, but they basically kind of describe the American agenda in the world for the past, couple of decades, promoting democracy, which are interests and which are values, which kind of lead to America being safer and stronger in the world and more prosperous, and which promote the idea that the United States brings good to the world, brings human rights to the world. So the goals for the class. By the end of this course, you should be able to answer in an essay question, which will be on the final exam at the end of the class. Answer an essay question about a current American foreign policy decision or strategy differently than you would answer it today as you're watching this video. By differently, I mean with reference to a past event that is analogous and applying a lesson from history, or by using a framework or frameworks we've discussed in this class or you've read about to interpret this issue differently, in that you understand the issue from the perspective of different stakeholders or actors other than yourself. You could cite the constraints on presidential power and administrations, both the legal constraints and the political constraints. Or you can and you should raise an insightful question about or make a projection about of a foreign policy or how a foreign policy might change that you wouldn't be able to make if you had to answer that question today. And always make reference to the readings. So as you're going through all the readings, and there's a lot in a compressed amount of time, take notes of things that stand out for you. And the purpose of our discussion boards as an assignment for this class is for you to keep track of the readings and as you go through. Major themes of the course. There are international sources of foreign policy, things that are happening in the world that shape what the United States does, but then there's also domestic sources of foreign policy. And you could reference here the student protests on college campuses. How much does that shape what decisions are made, and how much is it a response to what's happening in the world outside of the United States, the balance of power? National security versus defense spending. We'll talk about the military industrial complex and what that is. But, what does it take for us to feel secure in this world as a country? And does our incredibly high defense spending actually lead to enhanced security, or does it make us less secure? It's not an easy question. Another theme of the class is the executive branch of the government. That's the presidency, which includes the State Department, the CIA, the Defense Department, the Pentagon, that whole executive branch and its role in foreign policy versus congressional authority under the Constitution. What role does Congress play? Has it been playing its role? It's supposed to be overseeing foreign policy. It's supposed to be declaring war. And these two things are in tension all the time in foreign policy. Another theme is unilateralism, the United States acting alone in the world, or at least acting on without needing to act with allies. And then the idea that it shouldn't do that, it should act multilaterally with other nation states, with its allies, or try to forge alliances, or try to work through international organizations like the United Nations, so working together, cooperating, as opposed to working on its own. And in isolationism, as I mentioned before, is another longstanding theme in foreign policy. The US can go it alone. We have unique geography, to great oceans, friendly countries north and south. Can we kind of just focus on ourselves? Versus interventionism, how we intervene in the world, often for our interests, such as oil, or dominating other countries for their resources. And probably a better way of understanding interventionism is what kind of interventionism. Do we intervene militarily, economically? Should we, culturally? So these kind of three categories are themes in American foreign policy. And the last one we mentioned before is American exceptionalism. Are we really different from other countries in the world in the way we behave in our foreign policy? Do we promote values over interests more than other countries would or do? So now I'm kind of going quickly here. Course requirements. All the readings are on Canvas. We start with a textbook, a collection of essays in Merrill and Patterson, and we'll call that M&P on the syllabus, Major Problems in American Foreign Relations. We have a book that's a little bit kind of dated, you'll notice in its language, but it's still one of the, I think, most engaging books to read about American foreign policy in the 20th and 21st centuries, Ambrose and Brinkley, and we'll call this R2G, Rise to Globalism. And then there are some additional readings on Canvas, not too many, but you'll find them under the module of the week assigned. There's 5 assignments. 2 of them you will get done this week, so only 3 after that. There's an introduce yourself discussion board where you'll make a short video. I've posted mine. That's due this Wednesday, and then you'll comment on a classmate's, 2 classmates' videos by Friday. There's a syllabus quiz to make sure we are all on the same page of how the course is supposed to be, what the assignments are and when they're due. And then the 3 kind of major assignments for the class are discussion boards, due weekly, video and audio-based assignments. These are podcasts or films. And then a final exam at the end of the semester, which isn't too far off, 6 weeks from now. Just a couple of words about what asynchronous and summer classes are like, if you haven't taken them before. They are self-propelled, meaning you have to be on top of things. You have to be proactive. I am here. I am a resource. You can reach out to me anytime. Send me an email. I'm very good at responding to my emails. But it's not self-paced. You can't take your time. You have to keep up, and you have to know when the deadlines are. Again, it's 15 weeks or 14 weeks compressed into 6 weeks. So it's going to move very quickly. There's a lot of reading. Communication with me and with each other is key. If you find you can't keep up, or you have something that comes up in your life, please communicate with me. It's always better to do that, even if it's hard for you to do it. Better to communicate than not communicate, so I know what's going on. Just a more kind of granular thing. When you're writing, posting on the Canvas site for your assignments, please use full sentences. Please proofread your work. You should not be submitting things that are like texts or Instagram or whatever you do on social media. This is a class, and grammar counts, and complete sentences, not run-on sentences, all that matters. You don't need to write a lot. In fact, I would prefer if you write briefly, because brief writing, concise writing is effective writing, but you do need to use proper grammar. So pay attention to that. And for the assignments, take a look at the questions first. This is just a tip. Then read. And so you can read with a purpose to answer these questions, and then read or listen or watch, depending on what the assignment is. And then you write down your answers. So don't forget to look at the questions first before you get into the reading or that's it, or the assignment. So I hope that was helpful, and I don't want to keep this going too long. So I will see you in the class. I hope you enjoy it. It's a great subject, and take good care. Okay, bye.